Welcome, students, to the first year of the Hero Certification Program at Lander University. Let's see if you have what it takes to be a hero. Also, if you were listening in the limited time before we got started, you were listening to Fearless First, which you can find on incompetech.com. They are the ones that let us vibe before we get into things. And also keep in mind that if you join our Patreon, that's also what gets you the right to vote on the books. So if you want to if you just like telling people what to do or love engaging in the democratic process, it's more reason to head over there. And the more people that we get on there, the more content and time we will put into creating stuff. So the more we have, the more we can do. And we'd love to be able to do and engage more. Anyways, let's get into the book for this week. So this week on the 800s, we will be discussing Superpowereds, Year 1 by Drew Hayes. First of the 4-book series. In a world where people with superpowers are real and heroes bring justice to the land, how do heroes come to be? By going to college, of course. We follow a group of former Powereds, those with superpowers that cannot be controlled, who happen to be the first of their kind to gain control of their abilities through an experimental procedure. They have been enrolled at Lander University's Hero Certification Program to see if they have what it takes to beat out the best of the best and become certified heroes. Here, their physical, mental, and super limits will be tested, and they will have to prove that they are more than just Powereds. They are now super Powereds. All right, and as usual, just a quick disclaimer that we do cover adult themes and topics in the books that we discuss, and while we try not to do too much of it, swearing does go on, so bring young people around at your own discretion. It sounds like, thank you, Stormy, for letting us know we can't know this without the input. So knowing that, I will quickly go back and reiterate a couple of the things. Remember, check us out on youtube.com/DMstable and for our affiliate link for Audible, dmstable.com/audible. It is an invaluable resource that lets us listen and consume mass amounts of books that we would not be able to otherwise. If you want more information on the ins and outs of all the content that we produce, dmstable.com has everything from podcasts to blogs to what books are upcoming for the hundreds as well as the votes. And also, if you want to grab some random nerdy doodads, Alan over here is running our Etsy tape. The super cool dice on the back. I'm a little jealous of those. They're feel free to check us out at Etsy. That's etsy.com/DMstable. Please do let us know when you can start hearing Alan again. But for the time being, I'll kind of try to take the reins. Anyways, back to our disclaimer bit. We'll run through our socials at the end, hopefully when we have everybody back on board. Anyways, we do cover adult topics, so kids around at your own discretion. Also, we try to create a fun and supportive community over at DM's Table where people can feel free to express their love for whatever fandoms or activities that interest them without any fear of judgment or teasing or anything like that. So in sum, be nice or bug off.
Yes, absolutely. I think we should have the audio resolved now. I did have myself muted. That is my bad.
Well, we got back around to it.
Yes.
So what I'll
Thanks
do
again,
then
Storm.
is, thank you very much, Storm, for that. So I will do Adam's usual duty and say, why don't you start us off, Alan, by giving us your first impressions of the book?
Absolutely. So my first impressions. I was kind of pleasantly surprised. The tone of the book, the prose of the book, in the beginning, really pulled me in. It immediately had this more than like realism feel to it. Kind of like boys or uh, indestructible or invincible is the show. Uh, it's that gritty superhero when supers uh, aren't perfect. Things happen. Bad things happen. And a very realistic world of what happens when supers or even powereds are able to run amok in society. So that immediately captured my interest. I think this book certainly felt like it was on that cutting edge of that. I don't know that genre, right? That like
Hmm.
realism um, to hero superheroes genre. So how did you feel about that?
I thought it was like a very, like you mentioned, a very enjoyable, like easy to read prose. There wasn't anything, it wasn't anything particularly challenging, which especially coming off the heels of the books that we've read recently, it's a very different feel, and it was kind of a nice change of pace in that way. Also, for a book about about like superheroes, I actually found the influence to feel less like traditional Western style comic books superheroes,
Mm-hmm.
and it felt like there was an almost anime influence to this.
Oh,
I mean,
absolutely. Yeah.
uh, like I picked up on that very early on.
Yeah.
Uh, in part, the way that they treat the powers. There's a little more interest in the mechanics of the powers themselves, and
Yeah.
like a lot of manga and anime out there, the focus tends to be on a younger demographic. So your main characters are usually, you know, anywhere from like 12ish years old
Mm-hmm.
to like early 20s. They're typically not older, but this aspect of learning, like the ins and outs of learning what a power is and how it works,
Mm-hmm.
felt very, and the power-ups that happen, the training arcs and stuff, felt very anime or manga inspired, at least to some
Absolutely.
level.
I would
Apologize
I
for
would
that.
add to that like there is a distinction too. Like I think anime was a really good way of putting it, or manga, because there is a real distinction between like sufficiently advanced magic, which is very JRPG, compared to
Mhm.
this, which is very uh, manga or anime and feeling. So yeah, that I think you nailed that on the head. I couldn't put words to it, but now that you've said it, I absolutely feel it. Yeah.
I mean, it also super helps that one of the most popular anime mangas out there right now is known as My Hero Academia. I
Sure.
actually wore a hat of that once
Oh, you
back
did?
when I was doing, well, back when I did the thing that nobody else caught on to, where I was doing a different hat every single episode.
Mhm.
Um, I had a My Hero Academia one, but like the parallels there are too similar not to be noticed. Now, there are absolutely more Western influences, like I think there's a higher emphasis on like the actual day-to-day interactions that um between the students, like the
Mhm.
normal life stuff. You do
Yeah.
get that in Western like superhero tellings, but usually speaking, when and the difference is that in Western tellings of superheroes, the day-to-day life and the superpower usage are kept so separate from one another
Yep.
that they, that's why it's an alter ego, it's an
Yeah.
alternate identity. And while that does exist in this world, the blending between the powered and not powered, like super powered elements, are there's a lot more overlap, which feels a lot more anime manga inspired, because like even if My Hero Academia didn't exist, anything with supernatural powers in a manga or whatever, like that integrates into their day-to-day lives.
Yeah. I
So,
think
you know,
I think that's where I was really picking up the boys vibe or the indestruct
mhm.
or invincible. I'm gonna get that wrong all night. The invincible vibes. There's another live action uh Amazon one. But anyways, yeah, I mean, uh, what I liked about this over like anime or manga is that um, there was a lot less interpersonal drama or like uh, dr- internal drama. You know what I mean? Like I don't have a giant depth of anime or a giant depth to manga, but it feels like in that genre, it's very popular to be focused on like the there's a giant focus between the interpersonal and the internal conflict, and I felt like there was a really good balance between all conflicts, right? Self versus the world. How am I going to survive college? Uh, self versus self versus others, and self versus the internal self. And I think this book had a really good like mixing of those without without like really drawing it out and making it, I don't know. Uh,
Well,
yeah.
I think the what that last little bit is the bit that I agree with the most about drawing. Manga and anime have a way of drawing certain things out that
Yeah.
don't necessarily need to be drawn out
Yep.
because they are trying to uh,
That's where you can
th-
build tension.
yeah, well,
Yeah.
but they also benefit from being able to build tension through pictures,
Hmm.
um, which kind of bridges that gap for that. But if you're just writing it, you can't do that
Right.
because you don't have, you know, the facial expressions. You don't have the
Yeah.
burning building in the background to create tension in that way. And if you lose that, and if you have to write all of that out,
Hmm.
you just become bogged down in those details. And I'm glad that Drew Hayes didn't try to do that.
So I have a
Uh,
good question for you then.
yeah,
Um,
bring it on.
so I think my question I think my question would be for you. What was your favorite form of tension? Like it doesn't have to be like generic form. It could be like uh, the tension between two characters or between a character's self. Like where was your favorite like tension or hill to climb or what have you?
Well, it kind of varied at different parts of the story because my
Sure.
perceptions of people changed throughout. And um, I think, honestly, my favorite tension in this book, or at least the one that I followed the longest, was probably just in general the tension between the group of five, our Powards, and the rest of their class not knowing that they used to be Powards. I thought that was a really good case of like what is it like to have like be a group that is knows that if anybody finds out, prejudice is bound to become a part of it, and like how do you balance that trying to be open and honest with people and lying to keep your keep yourself or your group safe.
Yeah,
And I
especially
thought
lying to
that,
good like loved ones.
well, yeah, and they have to do this in the context of, and this is like kind of ties into it, is this tension of like, how do we explain both our strengths and our faults without giving the context of what we've been through? Now, luckily, some of that is stemmed by having teachers that know, but I thought that was where the most realistic tension came through. As far as like a one-on-one person thing, the closest thing I thought, the best tension I thought that there was between Roy and Herschel.
Ooh, that's a good one. That's a good one,
Um,
yeah.
like,
I loved that character arc. Like
yeah,
I thoroughly love Herschel and Roy's like conflict and their entire character arc. Figuring out how to work together as a team. They felt like brothers. Like they did.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it does help to have a mega powerful telekinetic slash telepathic force you
Right.
to like face each other, but that very much like that character becomes mom to the group for a reason,
Yeah.
you know, like mom told you to to sit down and talk it out, and you're not coming out until you got your shit together.
What do you like? Do you think that Drew did that intentionally, or do you think he had a
That being,
character in mind for Herschel and Roy, and then was like, wait, 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 how the hell am I going to control this guy?
well, I mean, I have uh some issues with the character as a whole, based on like his actual power,
Sure.
because I mean, I have some knowledge of how this goes later, and it does resolve to an extent. But within the confines of the year one book, I was just like, they treat him as what they call a shifter,
Mm-hmm.
and he the so like I for a very long time treated him like a very confined version of like Legion,
Sure.
from the Marvel comics,
Or
or
the Hulk.
less. I mean, kind of like the Hulk.
I got
I
big
was trying to
Hulk
think
vibes
about
off this
more.
guy.
I was trying to think about more like fully developed personalities, like
Sure.
the guy from Split.
Oh,
Um,
okay. Yeah, I know who you're
you
talking
know,
about.
where there's full on personalities, and yes, the
Yeah.
Hulk does have a personality, but like it doesn't come through as much. And I just didn't ever see them doing like say what Professor Hulk does, where the Hulk
Sure.
and the merge together. I just didn't see that, and I I had some issues with like, okay, this guy exists. We know that he came about when Herschel was getting bullied,
Mm-hmm.
which, it's a prime example of a power manifesting through stress, but which is a pretty prototypical thing. It's just it felt the power itself felt incomplete. The internal, like I liked the internal struggle.
Mm-hmm.
The power itself felt a bit incomplete,
Sure.
and that was tough to reconcile, which is why I didn't put it as like my top thing. My top thing is still the group versus
Yeah, that's
versus
fair.
society.
Mm-hmm.
uh but what was your favorite conflict then?
My favorite was actually the. It was more of a conflict between the reader and crap. What was his name? The lucky guy,
Oh, Nick.
Nick.
That would be one of the ones that I
That it.
mentioned that changes throughout the book for
Yeah,
me.
I adored that conflict. Mainly because I was I was watching Nick. I was watching Nick closely, like through the book, because I mean he's obviously set up as a red herring, right? He's
Yeah.
sus from the start, and I adored that. At the end, there was great payoff. There was kind of a quick like character change, but I think it was like slow enough, and it was hinted at enough that at the end when he flips and he becomes less about himself or about his like con group, his con syndicate, and more about his friends, his immediate friends, or them becoming friends. I think that made sense in that moment. But like watching that grow was very enjoyable for me.
This might be just because I have like a psychology background,
Sure.
but like I initially did the same thing where I definitely fell for the red herring early on, and it changed. But the thing is that it changed, it feels like a bit earlier for me than
Sure.
for you, because it wasn't towards the end. It was when it was Parents Weekend. The
Yeah.
instant he interacts with Jerry, I'm like, oh, this isn't a kid who's actually the problem.
Yeah.
The kid's got paranoid personality disorder.
Oh,
Like
sure.
the kid has straight up trauma that he doesn't know how to overcome, so he keeps everybody at a distance, lies pathologically because that's what he was taught to do to survive. And I was just like, I don't dislike him as a character, but that
Yeah.
tension dropped so drastically for
Yeah.
me and so immediately that like it was decent payoff, but it wasn't like as consistent for me as far as
Yeah.
building tension.
Well,
But I do absolutely love the way that he was set up as red herring, because I
yeah.
fully admit I fell for it early on. I
Yeah.
did.
Yeah, same. I think so. Like, I certainly felt that drop off, right? But like, it was that build up to the final battle where I was like, okay, is this guy like out for himself, or is he gonna come back, right? And like,
Yeah.
I had a feeling he was gonna come back, right? Because that would be the classic like character shift. But it was
Yeah.
still like he was well set up the entire time to be so about himself, and he's got so many like motives behind his motives, right? That I don't know exactly why he's there yet, right? And so
Yeah.
at the end it was that like, is he actually going to show up? And it was, yeah. So that was my favorite tension.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it a lot, and there was a lot of really good tension in this book. There
Yeah.
really was. Like the Michael tension, that was a good one. I think I
That
think
one was a bit predictable, unfortunately, because of
it
like
was.
he got set up as very much so the bully. What I was surprised at is how long he was allowed to be in the program with all the shit he pulled.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. It's not
like,
like
I
they
get
don't
you're
know he's
powerful.
drinking.
Yeah, well, they even talk about it that they go through his room and they found
Yeah.
like more alcohol than anybody who should be drinking without who isn't going to destroy their liver.
Right.
And the fact that they don't bring that up on their own, that is actually brings me to my next question is
Okay.
what if any plot holes did you find through this book? Because I found a few.
Sure. Um Plot holes. So,
Plot holes are things that
yeah,
didn't like come through the way that like in
sure.
a way that was satisfying.
I think the Michael stuff wasn't as satisfying as it could be, but I think it's also set up for Michael to be a bigger antagonist in the future. Um, I think Michael just kind of shooting his mouth off over the intercom at the end was doing his character some disservice. I don't think Michael would have done that. Michael is a very like, at least from my understanding of the character, he is a very face on physical person who resolves conflict through physical means, and we never saw the growth to the point where he could just like point out somebody in a crowd and be like, haha, they were Powards. Like, it just, I feel like he would have used that information in a different way as a character. And yeah. So I was fully expecting a bigger like fight at the end instead of nothing.
Well, I'm not entirely surprised, and this is partially because they go over it at the end, his like profile of like what type of person he is and why he was admitted to the program in the
Mhm.
first place. And when they're going over that, they're like, okay, he was admitted because he was always the type of person that if somebody even remotely came close to beating them, he would relentlessly pursue ways to beat them.
Mhm.
And come out on, or at least come out on top. And he had finally encountered somebody who he couldn't
Sure.
overcome. And the thing is that one, addiction makes you do crazy things, especially when it like comes to drugs and alcohol. Uh, he clearly was drunk. I like it's not to me out of line for somebody who's dealing with substance abuse to do something like that. That is
Sure.
slightly out of character, but he's also effectively a cornered animal who lashed out in a different way because he did try physical
Mhm.
multiple times and it didn't work multiple times, or at least not in a way that was satisfying for him. So what did he do? He tried to come out on top in a different way. And yeah, I do believe that there is going to be more to that storyline. There's not enough complexity to him as a person to be anything more than just a bully, in my opinion. Not as he stands, unless there's some drastic changes that go on, and he needs to be confronted by somebody who isn't Vince to put him in his place.
Yeah. I think he's got
Um,
too big of an axe to grind for him
Yeah.
not to become a villain of some
Yeah,
sort.
it felt a little, well, yeah, it just felt a little cheesy, like how stereotypical of a
Yeah.
bully he was. And the plot hole for me is the fact that they constantly talk about how heavy the screening process is for this.
Yeah,
And
and they
yeah,
didn't
I know
catch
they
it.
kind of write it off as a, well, some of the best supers I know were people who had a killing intent, but they had to keep it in check. But nobody confronts him and tries to get him to keep it in check.
Right.
And then they're just like allowing him to just be a dick to everybody, and they know he's being a dick.
Right.
And that doesn't seem like a hero to me. Yeah, he's got a powerful power, but we fully know that there's another organization out there that takes powerful people that aren't heroes.
Yeah.
So, like, why he kept in the program other than being an excuse to have somebody out them that was within the program,
Hmm.
I don't know. It just, that felt a little lame duck to me. And
Sure.
the other one that stands out to me
Hmm.
as a bit of a maybe plot hole is the wrong word, but uh, this goes a bit into predictions. But the whole deal with Globe and uh, that his clear connection to Chad because Chad
Yeah.
breaks a desk, and this character that
Well, it's
like
clearly
this
his
is this is
dad.
a bit
At least
this
my
is a bit
my guess is it's his dad.
my guess is actually Globe is Vince's dad.
Wait, wait, isn't
And I
Globe the
think
guy who died?
Globe is the guy who killed Intra, who I think is actually Chad's dad.
Really?
And Globe died, and he's pissed because, like, any mention of, because it was the mention of Globe, not Intra, that got Chad to,
Yeah.
uh, and
Okay.
he left. But, like, there's a couple other
That's
clues
fair.
that I'm not thinking of off the top of my head, but
Hmm.
Globe is the character that I pegged for Vince's dad, whether it's I
Sure.
believe it's his like biological dad,
Oh, yeah, probably.
and because Vince's parents disappeared,
Yeah.
and I don't think he's like, it is very much being set up that Globe isn't actually dead,
Yeah. Oh,
right?
yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Um,
Well, and I think
so
I think some of the like Tin Hat setup is each of the characters inside of the party, right? I
oh,
think I think they all
sorry.
have connections.
Here is my clue that got me thinking about this in
Yeah.
particular was when Coach George says you're just like your old man.
Yeah.
How the fuck would he know with Vince? He doesn't know
Well, he
Vince.
works
Vince
for him.
was, well, yeah, but I'm saying that's what I'm saying though is that I think that's why I thought George, the connection between George, Vince, and Globe
Oh, okay.
is what makes me think Globe is his dad. Like, because how else would George know about his old man? Because Vince was riding the rails his entire fucking life.
Yeah, but George worked for Vince's dad.
No, yeah, that's what I'm saying is, but the plot hole in it for me,
Okay.
and I'm getting into this
Yeah, yeah,
portion of it,
yeah. Sorry.
is this idea that like, um, it is kind of setting it up that like we don't know what Globe's power is, but we know that he can potentially has a power or know somebody who would allow him to fake his death, right? And I don't know, there's a lot of convolution there without enough payout. It's just when you leave your audience confused about something, not just guessing and tin hatting, but there's
Yeah.
some like outright confusing stuff, especially when you add in the aspect of whoever the was who taught Vince how to fight, right?
Yeah, the guy on the rails.
And like, was he like an associate or whatever? And
Sure.
I thought like there was too much of that going on. Like there was just, and I think this was a general problem with this book, and part of why it was so long is Drew Hayes had a lot of ideas that he tried to shove into a already big book,
Yeah.
and it could have been done with a little more subtlety, and it leaves you with plot holes like, um you know, why was why was Vince um for a little while in his life not showing displaying his powers, because
Right.
for a little while there I thought Zero might have been his the railway dad, until I figured out that
Okay.
it's pretty obvious he never rode the rails.
Yeah.
uh there's just it there's a point where when you have too many questions, it becomes a draw away from the main book.
Sure.
And that's why I said plot hole is probably the wrong word, but when you put too
No, I
much
think
stuff
I
in.
think that's solid. I think that's the right kind of word for this. And I think it's just a different type of plot hole. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like,
or at the very least a plot distraction,
sure.
which,
Yeah. It's
like,
convolution.
I get that he's setting this stuff up, but
Yeah.
there's just too many avenues, and there's something to be said for being discreet in how you
Yeah.
do that, and using subtlety rather than just throwing so much information at people that they don't get it.
Do you
So
do
I
you
would consider that a more unsatisfying plot element.
sure. Do you think Drew showed too much of the iceberg? Like we talk about the proverbial iceberg a bit on the show, where like
Hmm.
an author has like their plot and their story and their magic system, and that's an iceberg, and the idea is to only show a little bit of the iceberg and have a bunch of stuff underneath the water that the reader doesn't know, doesn't see. And so you can reveal more and more of that iceberg as your story goes on through other books. Do you think he tried
Um,
to reveal too much of the iceberg here?
I thought, in a way, yes, because it's not like he showed you the details of the iceberg, but I
Yeah.
felt like we got way too much of the outline of it,
Yeah. Yep.
And part of
Absolutely.
that is because he leaned into a lot of very stereotypical character tropes,
Sure.
right? Like, uh, I'm going to put this in as another question.
Okay.
What character tropes did you pick on, and what ones were satisfying or not?
Ooh. Are we talking character tropes like superhero character tropes? Or hmm.
Either.
Um
If you like, I can start off with
yeah,
my
go
main
for it. Go
example.
for it.
Charles Adair is almost certainly the big bad evil guy. He's the BBEG, almost
You think
certainly.
so?
He's a billionaire dickhole, like, who is like neglectful at best and abusive at worst to his daughter,
Sure.
who he taught to be manipulative, and who clearly has a good heart. Like, this guy, the question is he a Joker style mastermind, or is he a Mr. Freeze style, I'm trying to do this for like what I think are the right reasons but aren't?
Sure. Yeah. I think
Um,
I think Charles Adair, in my opinion, right? I could see him being the BBEG, but I think I don't know. I was getting ultra powerful. This is the guy who runs the world kind of
well, yeah,
vibes.
and
You know
that's
what I mean?
yeah,
Like not
but
quite
that's where
like
the BBEG part comes from me. I don't think
right,
it's
right, right.
because he is so overwhelmingly physically powerful.
Yeah,
It is just he has manipulated his way into
absolutely.
being the root cause of a bunch of evil in the
Yeah,
world,
I think
right?
I think this is like for me I think this is the Netflix Kingpin. You know what I'm
Yeah,
talking about? Where
yeah,
like
absolutely.
big power, big money, and
Yeah.
is like trying to do what he can to just do what he can. Like he is behind the scenes in almost all deals, stuff like that.
But he wants power. He
Yeah,
wants power for the sake of power.
yeah,
The biggest difference being the kingpin can actually kick ass. This guy has a borderline busted power.
yeah,
Uh, Maybe not for combat, but for like almost anything else. And even then, for
yeah.
combat, like if you can touch something, depending on how fast you can do it, if you can change material
yeah,
properties of matter, you could easily use that in a combat way.
absolutely. Yeah.
Um,
I think
yeah,
I think my like uh a a character trope that I picked up on would be like the I don't know, the classic dick, like like uh what do you call it? Not Herschel, the other one,
Roy.
Roy. It's a simple name to remember too. Um, but like Roy is that classic like just jackass, and
Borderline toxic masculinity
yeah,
embodied.
yeah, that whole he's a jackass, but he's our jackass. You know that
Hmm.
classic character trope. Um, I did have a bit of respect for him in some
So it was a
regards.
satisfying trope.
Absolutely. Yeah, I had
Okay.
a bit of respect for him in some regards after like he started changing. Um I loved the quote of like what was it? It was like there's only two things in this world that I love and that's fighting and my mama. And I was like, "Oh, that's a good quote. That's a
Three,
good one."
three things. It's
Three
like
things.
fighting my mama and whiskey.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's what it was. And man, that was some classic like
Yeah, no, it was my
Western
mama, whiskey, and
jackass.
kicking ass. I
Yeah,
think it
that's what it.
was.
Yeah, yeah. And I was just like,
I like the
man,
way
I
that you.
loved it. He
I
was
like the way
written
that
well.
you put it. It's like he's a jackass, but he's our
Yeah,
jackass.
and I think that's what makes him the a character trope. I think that's
Mhm.
what allows him to fit into this like question is that exact quote. Um, so yeah,
Yeah, I
I
have a
enjoyed that character.
yeah.
Um,
Oh yeah, I think that's a really good example of a satisfying trope. I'm gonna kind of pull off of that one and
sure.
actually tie this also into my why I thought this was anime inspired or manga inspired.
Hmm.
Is there's a couple tropes in there that are very much like direct out of anime. One, the rich hoity-toity girl who is manipulative because she was neglected, but is actually smart. And once she has a chance to open up, has a heart of gold, type of
Yeah.
thing, right?
Yep. Yep.
And that's Alice, and that is a trope that was one I actually enjoyed because she was taken as a character that you're supposed to love to hate early on
Yep.
because she's
The
manipulative
mean
but not
girl.
actually good at it. She's a mean girl, but it turns out she just needed space to be herself, and you
Yeah.
see that in anime. But what I liked about this versus anime is that it didn't take a guy for her to do it. I mean, Nick
Yeah.
is obviously the one is obviously part of it,
But
but
it wasn't
really
her
it's her
catalyst.
relationship with Mary
Hmm.
that allows her to do it. And I loved that that was like it. She needed a friend,
Yep.
and it worked, and it was awesome. It was satisfying. It was
Yep.
very cool to see, and it fit a trope that I was used to, and it had just enough of a twist to make it satisfying.
Yeah.
Another trope. The super powerful girl who has the stuffed animal is very much an anime thing
Oh,
uh,
sure. Sure.
in
Sure.
Mary. That is
Yeah.
such an anime
Yeah.
thing to have the super powerful girl who has like the stuffed bunny or stuffed bear or whatever that she talks to.
Hmm.
Um, and it was cool to see her evolve into like the mom of the group instead of like just barely coming out of her shell. No, she took control.
Yeah.
Um, the one that I think there's potential for, but I thought was maybe a little tough to deal with sometimes for me was actually Vince. He is the I have the hero heart. Like he is the heart of the group. He is the quintessential hero in spirit, and he's holding himself back. That is a pretty big anime trope,
Yeah.
as well, and all silver hair notwithstanding.
Yeah. Well, and
But like,
the whole like I'm afraid to use my powers because if I do, I could kill
I'll hurt
everyone.
people.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you see that in some other like forms of superhero media, but like it is vastly more common in anime and manga, I
Hmm.
think, as a genre
Hmm.
or a medium. And it was a little tough to swallow sometimes because at least in the hero aspect of it,
Hmm.
he he gets played as a guy who's both smart and very dumb at the same time. And it felt a little inconsistent in where he was smart and dumb. Like obviously the interpersonal stuff he doesn't get, but when it comes to fighting, there's some things that he gets really well, and then there's other things that he just has zero mind for. And I get that is a very normal thing in real life, but Hayes was playing too much into a trope and then not detracting from it in a satisfying way. Like that's why I did Alice first. Is that a satisfying way to upend a trope? For him, it just felt like, dude, get the fuck out of your own way.
Yeah.
And he kept refusing to do it unless somebody kicked his ass into it.
Yeah.
And while I get that he's a character who's supposed to care more about others than himself, and that's where the fear comes from, I don't feel like there was enough progress from him.
Sure.
And for him to all of a sudden go, Super Saiyan at the end.
Yeah.
And he's just like, well, I'm protecting somebody, so I automatically have like massive control over my powers. I'm like, it felt like a little much into that trope, and it would have been more satisfying if there was a more healthy lead into that.
Yeah.
So unless we see fallout from that in the next book, it is going to be hard for me to see that as fully satisfying,
I think
he's a character you want to love, though, right?
Yeah. I think that's a very realistic character fault, though. Like
it is.
Like I know many people with that exact problem of just get out of your own goddamn way. And and you don't see them participate at their peak potential until the chips are down in their backside, right? And so
yeah.
I don't know. It was very realistic, but I think you are absolutely right. From a storytelling perspective, it can be a little cheesy. It can be a negative trope.
Well, I think like I said, it is a trope that makes you want to root for him, and I did mention that it is a very realistic thing for this to happen. I just don't think it was super the transition into that space of I'm going to go all out didn't feel as satisfying as some of the others, like when Nick finally reveals that he's a mastermind. The pieces are kind of laid out a little bit better there.
Yeah.
Whereas Vince goes from sucking down a couple car batteries to freaking full-on forest fire.
Yeah.
And
then, that's true.
And after it's done, he still seems reticent to use it again. The backtracking on it, I think it could have been handled with a little more nuance that would have made it more satisfying. It wasn't dissatisfying, it just was not fully satisfying for me. It felt like there was an element that was missing that could have taken it from a trope to a satisfying trope.
Yeah, that's fair. So let's take a step back from the literary analysis, and I've got a kind of fun question for you. Might be a little difficult. So so if you could have one of the powers in the group, but you had to take it as a powered, not a superpower, what one would you pick?
Does it have to be from the powered group, or is it any of the superpowers?
No. From the main character group. So Mary,
from the
Herschel,
Herschel, Roy, Mary, Nick.
Yep.
Alice. Alice and Vince.
Yep. Right? That's a tough one.
I guess technically speaking, the Roy Herschel is the one that I'd probably pick.
Sure.
Just because of the potential for the bad that can happen if you have insanely good or bad luck.
Yeah.
It's kind of implied that he's hurt people before with it.
Yeah.
Even if the good luck comes with it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Mary's, the voices would drive me absolutely bonkers. And
Yeah.
while I do love living in the woods, living on your own, like for 8 years, for an entire lifetime,
Oh yeah, you would
would
go
drive you
bonkers.
insane in a different way.
Yeah.
Vince's, for obvious reasons, like I also wouldn't want to hurt other people, and having uncontrolled absorption and redistribution of massive of seemingly unlimited amounts of power
Yeah.
is not anything I would want to inflict on the world.
I think
Um,
that's what makes this
it's
question so difficult is like all of them have a really bad like if you can't
well,
control it.
well, and yeah, and Alice's worst case scenario is that she floats into space and she
Yeah.
dies. So the only one that is manageable, that is more manageable without the drastic side effects, is
Yeah.
Roy.
I think
Is
so,
like
but I
having
think
is essentially you lose control at certain points, and
yeah.
yes, it is uncomfortable and not a great situation. Ultimately, the fallout isn't life threatening to you or other people
Yeah, you're
or your
right.
sanity.
I don't know about that part. So like
Well, debatable on the sanity thing.
yeah, see here's my like argument against it cuz I actually would choose Mary's. And so the reason between Mary's and Herschel's is that I think unless you can come to terms with your alter ego, which can be thoroughly difficult because they are significantly different people without direct lines of communication. Um, I think you could never have a real friend group because you're always ditching out, right? Is kind of where I'm at. So you're already lonely.
Well, I
And
would slightly disagree with that just
sure,
because Herschel managed to have like his LARPing group.
he did,
Like,
but they didn't like Roy. Like they hated Roy.
yeah.
And that
Yeah, I mean, you
distanced them.
wouldn't have the depth of friendships,
Yeah.
but my argument for Mary is that
There's
if
no
the
friends.
psychic power, yeah,
Yeah.
there's nobody
Yeah.
at all.
I would honestly like I would rather go crazy and die early than have like no deep interpersonal connections for a long life. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because like if you think
Um,
of like late life, like you're talking potential marriage, you're talking potential kids, like that would be like those potentials could be like a a non-starter. That might not be in the cards, and that would be tough for me personally.
yeah, and that's a fair assessment.
Yeah.
Honestly, Mary is probably my second.
Yeah, and
So
I
like
think I'm vice versa, right? Like I think
like
Herschel's my
but the
second.
other three all come with like
Oh yeah,
harm to
people are gonna
yourself or
die.
others.
Yeah.
Uh, or because Alice only stayed alive the way she did because she was essentially isolated, and we
Mhm.
saw what that did to her.
Mhm.
Um, you know, yeah, I think we're on the same wavelength
Yeah.
that there's a clear no
Yeah.
for a
Something
couple of them.
something that they didn't explore, but really Drew hinted at it a lot at the start, was that her emotions affects like her like her like weight
Ability,
or her ability, right? But
because when
like
she got happy, she flew.
right, but
Or
he never talks about when she gets depressed. Does she get heavier? Like thoroughly
um,
heavier? What happens
it's
there?
not really explained, and actually that was one of the plot holes that I forgot that it felt dissatisfying for me was like everybody else gets some kind of delving into the mechanics
Yeah.
of their power, and hers is just she can fly.
Yeah.
But like they constantly reiterate in the hero course, everybody's power is different and it
Yeah.
works in different ways,
And
but
you
they
need
never
to
really
explore
delve.
it.
They don't. There doesn't feel like any effort to explore it. I mean, I
And
have my
I think that's part of her character though too, is she thinks that that's all she can do, and she
yeah
tries to explore it, but you can tell she's not trying. You know,
yeah
she's got that like she's in that mindset of like all I can do is fly, so what am I going to try? But it doesn't feel like she's going outside of her box enough that
Yeah,
we've
and for
found
a
out what
character
her
that's been
actual
shown to,
power is.
sorry,
No, that's fine.
yeah, I agree, and that's what makes it dissatisfying and
Hmm.
feels like a plot hole is because he has set her up as a character that is smart, that is driven when something's important to her,
Yeah.
and for her not to have tried other things or or thought about how her power works
Hmm.
feels lazy.
Sure.
Anyway,
Sure. No, that's
but
fine.
yeah, I'm glad you brought up the powers bit because like that was going to be similar to my last question, aside from final impressions. But um, for now, though, what did I want to ask? What did you think about Lander and the HCP?
Okay, so this gets into something that I actually had a qualm about this book is I was so freaking confused about the distinction between Lander and the HCCP or the HCP or whatever it is.
Yeah, Hero Certification Program,
Yeah,
HCP. Yeah.
I I was so confused because I thought at some point they said that multiple universities go to the HCP and so each company runs a university, but then they only ever talk about Lander, and I'm like, what the hell is going on? Who's where is everything? And so I don't know. I got confused there, but go ahead.
It isn't something that's explained a lot, but I think I know what happened is you misheard something.
Sure.
Because what they say is there are multiple universities that have a hero certification program.
Gotcha.
So, like, think of it as like when you apply to an engineering college,
Yeah.
every university has an engineering college, and there are four universities in the U.S. that have a hero certification
Gotcha.
college major
Okay.
whatever. And but if you mishear that, that's you are right that it is kind of a faux pas that like you don't want to reiterate something too much, but if you say it once in one line at the
Yeah.
very beginning and somebody misses that, you're absolutely right. I can like as soon as you said that, I'm like, damn, if I had been under that assumption,
Yeah.
this whole book would have made like no sense in large chunks of it.
Yeah, I was just so thoroughly confused about like wait. How does Vince's girlfriend just so happen to also be at Lander if there's only a few Superds and we're talking about multiple universities? And then how the hell is Michael supposed to be there too? I felt like wow, this is really Lander stacked. I mean, at some point I was like, well, I clearly have just misunderstood this, but
Yeah.
it was always in the back of my mind of like, did I misunderstand or is this all coincidental?
Yeah, it
But
was a misunderstanding, but
yeah,
there were easy ways to rectify that, and all you had to do was maybe make a little more mention of the other programs,
sure, yeah,
and
and he
explain
did
that.
late in the book.
Well, yeah, but like I said, if you don't,
Yeah,
it's not until like it's at the very beginning and the very end,
yeah,
and you go through that much of the book, and it would have been very simple to be like, we don't do our program the same way X school does. We do it this
right,
way or whatever.
right,
Um, and uh, I think the closest we get to it is when they're talking about, yeah, like at the very end when they're kind of debriefing everything.
yeah.
Uh, we get a little bit of a peek into it when Nick starts rooting around the library.
Nick, I thought it was Mary.
Oh, sorry, Mary, you're right.
Okay,
My bad. I was
that's okay.
thinking Mary said Nick, but yeah, we get a little bit into it where she starts looking up like current heroes
Yeah.
and where and how some of them went to different schools.
Yep. Yep.
But yeah, if you don't have that element down pat at the very beginning, that makes for a very, very confusing element to
Yeah.
the book that is pretty fundamental to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it'll help if you decide to go on to the other books
Right.
now that you have that clarification. But
Yeah.
yeah, um,
Otherwise, like Lander and the HCP, I think it makes a lot of sense. I love the concept of like only only the select few get are allowed to become hero status, and like they need to filter through like character defects, they need to filter through drive and like usefulness to the world in a whole. Um,
Hmm.
I thought that um, I thought that like he set up a really good classist dynamic where there's this weird uh, point of like if you're a powered, you just kind of usually wish that you were a normie instead because your life is uncontrollable in most cases and you're usually looked down upon by both groups, the normal people and
Hmm.
the supers.
Yeah.
I
And
thought
I
that was
also
cool.
like that he kind of set up a dynamic of the supers thinking that they're better than normal
Yes.
people, but also being there to protect them, while normal people both emulate them by, crazy styles,
Mhm.
and fear and hate them as well to a
Mhm.
degree.
Mhm.
And
Absolutely.
Powards are caught in this middle land of being hated by both groups, but also dismissed by both groups.
Mhm.
Whereas the other ones both admire and hate each other, but more actively.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really good bit of complexity to a dynamic that could have been very easily put into a very classist, like
Yeah.
better, better, worse, worst.
Yeah.
And it wasn't. There's this interaction between all of them, which I give them credit for.
Yeah, I totally respect it because that would have been also an easy thing to just completely gloss over. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like that is
Yeah.
something he didn't have to like flesh out, but because he fleshed it out, it added enough depth to the world that made it more believable and it set up some good conflict potential, especially explaining why it's such a big deal for like the Powards to be able to become supered. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
So, how do you think Drew Hayes handled the like social interactions between people? Like, do
Like
you
the
think he did a good job of?
conversations.
Well, I mean, I'm talking like social interactions, like because there's a lot of stuff that happens in social settings. Like we're talking
Yeah.
about the Halloween party
Yeah.
when they go out to the bar and they meet like the supers that aren't in the program and normal people as well. The freshman river trip. Like, how do you think he handled social interactions between supers and supers as well as supers
Yeah.
and normal people?
I think he did an amazing job. Um I think Drew really understood his dynamic there. And I think one of the things that he did well was that he understood college life thoroughly. I got crazy flashbacks to college and understood kind of where these characters were coming from and they were classic, right? The social interactions that they have are at least for me the classic or quintessential college interactions. Going to bars, playing beer pong, at like house parties, whatever. It was very classic, and I think he gets great marks for understanding his characters.
Yeah, I completely agree. He has a decent idea of like how these things typically go down, and it could have been very easily heavy-handed, and it
Hmm.
wasn't. But honestly, I genuinely enjoyed how he created um these bits of drama that are very humanizing for the
Hmm.
supers, like
Yeah.
showing that they're not above the same mistakes that everybody else makes. Like, um, you know, there is, the best example is probably uh, Alex and Selena, right?
Yes. Yep.
Where the fact, like, where like she did something stupid, resulting in a breakup, and it was something that, yeah, like a lot of times in like Western uh, depictions of superheroes in particular, the tension happens because they have a power.
Hmm.
But in this case, it would have happened regardless of whether or not there was a power. And in fact, probably would have been even worse if there would have been powers involved because, Alex is, well, not a telepath, but uh, you know, he can read emotions.
Hmm.
He's a force user.
Hmm. Yeah.
But he can read emotions, and she had to make this choice to do this thing that caused them to break up,
Hmm.
and it was just a dumb thing that somebody did at a party. Like that is the most college shit ever,
Yeah.
and if the powers aren't there, it's almost more um you know uh it's almost more of a problem if the powers aren't a part of it, which I thought was a kind of cool thing to do because it shows that you understand that these people are still people, and it kind of makes the characters easier to connect with. We see also a
Absolutely.
little bit of that with like the prejudice that um, Sasha shows towards Powards, and her reaction.
Yeah.
Uh, uh,
Sasha's the fast one,
that
right?
causes. Yeah, so she is Vince's
Yep.
girlfriend for
Yep.
most of the book. Um, where that anybody who has that prejudice, like she's otherwise seemingly a great girl, but she has
Hmm.
this bit of prejudice, and it makes her hard to root for her relationship with the main character. And it's something that she does just kind of passively. And in college, in particular, when you're coming off of everything you've learned just from a fairly isolated social circle, your family and where you grew up going to high school or whatever, you have this certain worldview, and she hadn't expanded that worldview fully in college.
Yeah.
And
I
then
I
she's
like
finally
that.
confronted with an issue, and she did also another quintessential college thing where she was really pissed that there was a lie and she
Yeah.
felt like she wasn't trusted, but instead she pinned it on the easier thing, which is the prejudice.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think that was a great setup that he did with the I think it was Alex or no, the genius one, the tech genius, where like
Will.
Will, yeah, I think he set up a great like setup for that of showing like if you're supered, you're regardless of your character, you're going to be like the cream of the crop person, who
Hmm.
everybody wants to be with, everybody wants to be in high school, and so coming to college is a very different experience. Um, yeah, I love that setup, which led into Sasha's conflict, right?
Yeah, but it also he showed that it was more complex than that
Yeah,
because with Camille, she
right.
was
Yes.
fully like he showed that there's a full spectrum,
Hmm.
but he also showed how easy it is to come in with that mindset.
Yeah,
I really hope there is a better resolution to it because I don't like hating Sasha as much as I do for her reaction, but
I don't know. I don't think they're gonna reconcile.
I don't think the relationship is going to reconcile. I'm
Yeah.
just hoping she learns a lesson because
Oh, sure. Yeah.
like
I could see her
um
teaming up with Michael though. I could see her
I
becoming a
really
villain
don't. I
because of it.
don't. I would hate for that to happen, but I can see it
Yeah.
happening.
Yeah.
All right, so why don't we get into final thoughts? As a part of final thoughts, I would love to hear what of the powers that you heard about would you want as a
Sure.
uh, super, not a powered.
Yeah.
You
Um
don't have to explain why. Just you can leave it at the end. But final thoughts are the main thing.
sure. I'll start with that. I think I think the thing that I would want is what Chad has. The ability to have full control over one's body.
Yeah, that is a pretty bonkers power if you're
Yeah.
willing to dedicate yourself to it.
Yeah. I like the whole idea of being able to like in a given moment exercise my muscles without, you know what I mean, like being able to like remesh and exercise them uh on command,
Well,
and like
well,
building in neurons that just allow me to have reflexes and stuff.
what the insane thing is that you could literally eat whatever you wanted
Yeah,
and down to the molecule only keep the stuff that benefits your body.
right, exactly.
Like,
Yeah.
uh,
So,
honestly, that genuinely it's in my top two, along with I. Once he has control of it, I think it would be super freaking dope to have the luck power.
oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Like, uh, I don't know how much control. Like, it depends a little bit on the amount of control that he has, but like the possibilities, especially if you have like a Nick level intellect,
Mhm.
and the fact that this is probably working with quantum probabilities.
Yeah.
If you ever got control
And
of
his
that, you're
absorption.
talking borderline reality warping power,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I think for his power, uh it's really about his observations of the world around him, and then being able to manipulate quantum probability. Like
Yeah.
being able to
And if
nudge
you ever got
something.
full control of that,
Yeah.
like it is the it could be a potentially busted power.
Yeah.
And just because I'm this type of person, I thought the healer power could be pretty cool. It
Sure.
sounds like Camille can just literally take anything out.
Yeah.
It's not just like a because they do make a distinction that she's not just a like they've got a different guy who accelerates healing powers.
Yeah.
Hers
Yeah.
just takes it away. I think that'd be dope. But ultimately, my top two are the I love the possibility of Nick's, but I love like what we actually know about Chad's.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So my final thoughts on this book. I would highly recommend this book to someone who's been in or is actively in college. I would not recommend this book to a high schooler, um, mainly because of the influence on their expectations going into
Yeah.
college. This is really, and I saw this on Reddit of like she was a person was asking on Reddit, should her son um, be allowed to read supers, uh, and they were in like middle school, and I was like, at the time I was like, maybe, you know, I hadn't gotten terribly far into the book, but like after being done with this is not a book for people below a high school level, and I would highly recommend that it's a college book. It is not
Yeah.
a high school book, in my opinion.
Maybe a senior in high school at
Yeah,
most.
maybe, but even then,
And
like
even
it
that,
really
even then,
colors
yeah,
the college experience. Like it I think the best part about the college experience is experiencing it yourself from a new
yeah,
perspective, and
fresh perspective. Yeah,
a fresh perspective, and then read this book and be like, holy shit, like this guy knew, right?
yeah. I think
So
you would absolutely get more out of it that way.
yeah.
Yeah. Any other
Yeah,
final thoughts?
I think the prose are really easy to read if you are into the realistic style of superheroes, where superheroes have consequences on the world and the people around them. Um, so fan of like Invincible or The Boys or what have you. You know, this is a good book for you.
Mhm.
Um, I I think a drawback is it's hella long, and I think that it's not terribly concise. So you're going to potentially spend a lot of time into this book that could have been boiled down a little more.
Mhm.
But all in all, I would recommend this book wholeheartedly. How about you?
I agree that I would recommend this book to most adult readers who want. It's not a challenging read,
No.
uh, by way of prose, but it is challenging by way of length. The same stuff that you mentioned, where like there's a lot of potential here, but I think Drew Hayes could do with being more concise with how he presents stuff.
Yep.
There's a lot of really good fleshed out elements to the superpowers, and in particular to the personalities that are using them. But there are also elements that feel overly convoluted or that don't quite match up in a way. And so there are elements that I think need polishing
Mm-hmm.
overall. And I'm hoping that, I would absolutely recommend giving this a shot, seeing if it gets better as it goes, to see if it can justify how long these books are, because they're all long. I've looked at it. Uh,
Really?
but like,
Yeah. I
yeah, like I think book four is almost twice as long as book one.
Good
Um,
grief.
it's
Yeah.
like it's like 60 hours. It's nuts.
I think I'd like to see how Drew and his editor work together in the future,
Yeah,
because I think
yeah,
a
so
good chunk of this is like working out the kinks between potentially a new editor.
yeah, yeah. And so I would recommend this if you have to a reader that has patience, likes a potentially easy read with some very interesting elements. So it's not something I'd recommend to everybody, but for the people who like the genre, I
Mm-hmm.
would absolutely highly recommend it. And for people who actually like character growth, because
Yeah.
that's,
Lots of
he's
it.
pretty good at. There's lots of it, and
Mm-hmm.
in ways that feel realistic to college students. So,
Yep.
yeah, that's more or less how I feel about it. Yeah. Anyways, I think that is going to take us to the end for tonight. So why don't we quickly plug our socials? We'll let you know what books are coming up, and then we'll be done for the night.
Yeah. So go check out pretty much anything about us at DM's Table at dmstable.com. You can follow us on X or Twitter or whatever it is now, at DM's Table, and on Facebook at the DM's Table. Hit us up on our socials if you'd like access to our exclusive Discord group.
Yeah, we'd love to have you there. That's where we do the bulk of our chatting and where we can be free from the lizard overlords. All right, so our winner for this latest vote is Coraline by Neil Gaiman. So that will be our October read. That will be October 28th. For September, we will be doing Uprooted by Naomi Novik. So that is September 30th,
Yep.
Uprooted by Naomi Novik. And on deck after that, October 28th, Coraline by Neil Gaiman. You
Second
have,
Neil book this year.
or Gaiman,
Gaiman, I think.
uh, this year? I thought it
I
was
think so.
almost exactly a
Oh,
year ago
yeah,
that we
maybe. Yeah,
did,
you are right. You are right. Yep, we did it
or
last
it
year
might be just less than a year because I know we
because
did
we reviewed
American
it.
God. We did American Gods, I believe, actually September of last year, so it
Yep.
is slightly over a year.
Yep. You're right.
Uh,
You're right.
but he's one of the
He's
best
prolific.
best fantasy, arguably one of the best fantasy authors out there. So I'm not hurting reading another one of his
Sure.
books. Um,
So next book we're gonna read is Uprooted, right?
yes, next
Excellent.
book is Uprooted, and on deck afterwards is Coraline by Neil Gaiman. And November, we will have our book vote up for our giving thanks books. Those are books that we are either thankful that we read or were recommended to us, or that are about being thankful for something.
Hmm.
We will have that book vote up soon, and going into December will be our usual redemption, uh,
Yeah.
or if you or as Alan said, our toilet bowl.
Yeah.
Our toilet bowl books, so books
I
that
like
we voted
Redemption.
on but didn't make the cut.
Yeah.
The toilet bowl thing works for the
It
bowl
does.
season
It
though.
does.
So, but toilet bowl colon redemption arc.
Whoa, colon.
Uh,
Yeah. So
and we'll get back to you next time on what's coming up in the new year.
excellent. Great. Well, I think that's it for tonight,
Yeah.
and we'll see you all next book. See you
Yeah,
guys.
thanks for joining us, everyone. See you
Thank
next
you
book.
so much. Bye.
Bye. Have a beautiful
Bye.
time.
Bye. Transition. Bye.